Good morning. Welcome into the Russ Joy Show, the first ever episode of the Russ Joy Show. I'm Russ Joy. You figured that out because you're smart, and also it's the name of the show. And I'm really excited to be here, and I'm excited to have you here with me. And if you look around, and if you've been watching some of the other shows that I do, you'll probably notice that there are many of the things that have been around in the past. They are here. I've been testing this out for a while. I have a haphazard setup right now. There's still things that I want to figure out. I still have weird glares behind me. I still have some lighting things that are a little bit weird. The camera focus is sometimes right and sometimes wrong. Ultimately, it's a work in progress, but this is a show that is going to come to you live 2 times per week, Tuesdays and Fridays, at least until football season. Tuesdays and Fridays. Now, why Tuesdays and Fridays? As I fix this thing on my desk. Well, the reason's kind of simple. If you follow the other stuff that I do, you'll know that I host Crossing Broadcast on Mondays, which is a show that I helped to create in 2017 with the maestro, Kyle Scott of Crossing Broad, and Adam Lefkoe, who went from doing that show and doing stuff with Bleacher Report off to being a guy who on Tuesdays on TNT, on the NBA on TNT, took Ernie Johnson's spot. So, like, once a week, you'd see Adam Lefkoe hosting shows with Shaq and Charles Barkley and, Dwayne Wade, Candace Parker. I think he's doing a podcast with Shaq now. So, they've both gone off and become, well, Kyle's definitely a multimillionaire, and I assume at this point, given his status with Turner Sports, that Lefkoe is probably also, if he's not a millionaire yet, he will be very soon and very well deserved, which leaves me, decidedly not a millionaire, coming to you live from my basement office. This show is one that I hope you'll be excited about whenever it hits your feed. If you're wonderful enough to join me live on YouTube over at The Russ Joy Show, thank you. You'll notice that today of all days, what better thing to do on the first day than have to lead you to a different YouTube channel first? Very simple. I set everything up last week. I was on vacation last week. I'm wearing an Outer Banks shirt right now. I decided last week, hey, the first week of July is going to be the time to roll the show out. We'll be coming off the NHL draft. We'll be coming off the NBA draft. Mini camps are going to be coming up. Training camp's going to be coming up. Flyers are going to have dev camp. Free agency was going to hit. Who knew what the Sixers were going to do? And I thought, first week of July, that's the time to launch the show. And so I did. I did everything, right? I got everything set up. And then I did this thing that I do, and maybe you can relate to this, but I overthought everything. I mean, I made everything way too difficult. I sat with crippling anxiety for a little bit about all right, well, is the trailer for the show good enough? Is the announcement good enough? And instead of putting out the announcement at the end of last week like I intended to, I put it out on a Monday episode of Crossing Broadcast, and then I threw a different one up on social media. And what I never did was actually test to make sure that the new YouTube channel at The Russ Joy Show can stream live right away. Well, I can't. I have to wait until 4 o'clock today. And once this show is done, once we are done being live, I can put it up on the Russ Joy Show channel on YouTube. But in the meantime, we're rocking and rolling over on the Joy Media LLC account. If you enjoy the shows that I do, including Snow the Goalie and It's Just Wrestling, and even that Monday Crossing Broadcast show, the Joy Media LLC account over on YouTube is a place to go. It's kind of like your one-stop shop for anything that I do. Although I might question your sanity and why you choose to listen to all those things, but I do appreciate you tremendously. Now, if you're new and you have no idea who I am and why the algorithm pushed you here, I'm going to give you a very brief roundup of who I am, why I'm doing this. And then we're going to get into some exciting stuff that has happened over the past week, including Paul George joining the Philadelphia 76ers, including the fact that the Sixers are widely being viewed as perhaps the second best team in the entire Eastern Conference. We'll talk about whatever the hell the Flyers are doing. They had a weird draft, a strange, perhaps reach of a first-round pick. They made a couple of free agent signings, bringing back a few of their own on Monday. I want to talk about that because I have significant concerns about it. And then last night, if you watched, and maybe you did and maybe you didn't, but we'll catch you up here because this show is not just Philly sports. This show also will touch on national sports and other things outside of the sports world. But the U.S. men's national team in the Copa America went out in absolutely horrific fashion on Monday night. And we're going to get to that as well, including apparently the U.S. Soccer Federation saying that they're going to have a full review of everything that led to this debacle. And knowing that they're going to be hosting a World Cup in 2026, they're apparently considering all things. All options are on the table. We're going to get to that later in the show. But before we do, I want to get to some of the wonderful people who hopped over here online, live, in the comments. Joe Papel wants Jürgen Klopp. We'll talk about that a little bit later on in the show. Jay Grebby asks if it's on YouTube. It will be. You can go to the Joy Media LLC account. That's where it's currently living live. The episode will be uploaded to the channel at The Russ Joy Show once this one's done. Starting with Friday's show, you could just go over to at The Russ Joy Show, and the episodes will go live there as well. Brandon Ficara checks in, listens to a couple of the other shows, says congrats on the new show. And it's his birthday. Brandon, happy birthday. Now, I'm not going to sing to you. I do have dulcet tones. I've got some golden pipes. This is like middle school show choir here. You don't know that, but it's in there. It's in there, Brandon. But thank you for joining me for the first show. Sean C. checks in with a few Flyers comments. We'll get to those in a little bit. Joe Papel has some stuff about the U.S. men's national team. So we're going to get back to all of that in a little bit. But first, before we do, little background, just a tiny bit. Now, if you look behind me, you could see it in front of me. Philly sports are kind of the thing that I do now. I was a teacher for almost 9 years. And I really loved being a teacher. I thought it was like the best thing. And somewhere along the lines in like middle school, high school, I decided like, hey, I want to be a teacher. I want to teach German and Spanish. And that was what I wanted to do. And I was going to find a job doing it. And I did. And I spent 8 years. I spent, the second semester of a year right after I got done college, teaching back up in Schuylkill County where I grew up in Pottsville, home of Yingling Beer and the true NFL champion Pottsville Maroons. We'll talk about that another day. But I went up there and I taught up there, and then I came down. I taught at Phoenixville. So if any of you are from the greater Phoenixville area, taught at Phoenixville High School for 8 years, and I had a lot of fun. COVID sucked. COVID took a lot of the joy that many teachers had for teaching, and I was one of those people. And in 2020, when Crossing Broad sold to XL Media, Kyle Scott at the time said, hey, like, come on board. We'll just hire you. And I said, no, I owe it to my students. I'm going to stick out the year. I don't know why I did that. Was it smart? I have no idea. It was fine. I finished up another year. It was great. And then they ended up hiring me full-time anyway. And so I got out of teaching. Now, along the way, in 2017, like I mentioned, Kyle Scott, Adam Lefko, and I, we founded Crossing Broadcast. It was a great time. Eagles went on to win a Super Bowl in our first year of doing the show. Then we all kind of went our separate ways. I stuck with that show, helped to create Snow the Goalie, which we lovingly refer to as the Only Flyers podcast. That show's gone on to do like incredible success, great numbers, has broken into the top 5 a few times nationally for hockey podcasts with Apple Podcasts, which is awesome. Very proud of that. We partnered that show with the Flyers last year. We're doing it again with them this year. But the one thing that we've always been proud about with that is we created a contract with the team, a partnership that said, we have creative control. You can't tell us what to say. And that's been really good. So last year, we were critical of the team, and we're going to continue to be critical when it's warranted. And they can't really do anything about it, which is great. So that's pretty cool. You build up enough equity, you build up a big enough fan base, team wants to work with you, you rock and roll with it. So I've done all that, written for Crossing Broad's site. I don't really anymore. I write more for the parent company in my current role, and that's more sports betting focused. And at some point along the way, I also covered the Philadelphia Union for a bit, including when they won the Supporters Shield. So that's why the Union, this is their inaugural season over here. That's why that's there. You'll notice that there are some Sixers things. AI winning the All-Star Game MVP is behind me. There's stuff about the Super Bowl win. And then this over here is like my favorite poster. And when I was a teacher, this was like the one that got the most questions from students, because this is like an old school NBA poster. You have Kobe Bryant wearing the number 8, Iverson, Kevin Garnett as a Timberwolf, Michael Jordan with the Wizards, Vince Carter, my favorite player growing up, the guy who actually made me love basketball, with the Raptors, and then Chris Webber before he sold his soul, I guess. Ended up with the Sixers in that weird trade for Corliss Williamson, Brian Skinner, Kenny Thomas. You all remember where you were. I was in middle school. Anyway, that's a little bit about me. Now, let's get back to the show and what the whole point of doing today's show is. The Sixers made a massive signing. And I did talk about this on Monday's show over on Crossing Broadcast. But to this new audience, to all of you who are out there, I've had another day to kind of digest and had another day to kind of think over if I think this is actually going to work. And I said yesterday that, like, I think there's a good chance that Paul George as a stylistic fit with Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey will work. And I will tell you that I'm actually now more convinced than ever that it is going to work. Truly, I think that it's the perfect fit with those two players. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, yes, there is a possibility that Paul George is going to want to handle the ball a little bit more than people might have initially thought. But that's not a bad thing. If you go back to what the Sixers were when they were at their best a few years ago, there was that time where people like me said, hey, Ben Simmons, if he would just shoot the ball. Ben Simmons with Jimmy Butler, Tobias Harris, Joel Embiid, very good team. You needed a secondary ball handler to take a little bit of the pressure off of Ben Simmons, and that's what Jimmy Butler did. And then as things kind of fell away and fell apart, we eventually kind of transitioned into that phase where there was Tyrese Maxey and James Harden, and there were a lot of questions about, well, is James Harden going to take too much of the ball handling and the setting up the offense away from Tyrese Maxey? And I think they actually found a pretty solid balance. Now, am I convinced 100% that Tyrese Maxey is your prototypical point guard? No, I don't. I think he's more of a combo guard. I have compared him on numerous occasions to being more of an Allen Iverson-esque player, at least in terms of his ability and willingness to get into the paint, to fight through contact, and to finish at the rim. I think we can all agree Tyrese Maxey is the best finishing guard at the rim that the Sixers have had since Iverson. He can go 100 miles an hour and have a deft touch right at the rim and never seems to get out of control. He's a sensational young player, and he took a huge step last year after Daryl Morey, I think, bungled the James Harden situation. Maxey took a massive leap forward, and even when Joel Embiid went out, Maxey never wavered. He never shriveled from in the moment. He never caved to the pressure. So when you went into this offseason, the thought had to be, who makes the most sense that will line up alongside both Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey? And while I think Embiid has kind of reached the peak of what he can be, which is an MVP when healthy, you didn't want to bring somebody in who's going to inhibit the growth of your young star in Tyrese Maxey. And when I kind of went back and I thought about it, and if you've been following along on social media to this point, you'll know that I said LeBron James was probably the best guy that you could have gone after, because I thought that LeBron, in fairness, you were going to have him on a short-term deal. He likes a lot of those one-and-one deals, signed for a year, player option. I thought, all right, one of the things that's always dogged him is that he's kind of a shadow GM. You're not going to run the risk of that really being a thing if he's here. And then it became apparent that when J.J. Redick was going to get hired by the Lakers, all right, well then fine. LeBron's going to stay out there. That's fine. There were rumors of Kevin Durant. The problem with Kevin, and I love Kevin Durant. I love the player. I think that Kevin Durant as a player to watch is one of the most enjoyable in the league. However, there are a lot of questions and concerns around him as a culture fit and around him as a guy who maybe is a bit of a malcontent. And so I certainly didn't want to add that to the locker room because I didn't think that that would work well with Joel Embiid. And I definitely didn't want that to kind of infect the mind of Tyrese Maxey. So, all right, that was out. And then that led you to pretty much two guys being left. One was Paul George, who I thought was mostly off the table because he always said he wanted to play in LA, and he had the chance to continue to play in Los Angeles and to play with Kawhi Leonard whenever he's healthy and to play with James Harden, who they acquired last year. I thought that was more than likely he was going to be there. And even last week, the report came out that the Sixers' interest had waned significantly in going out and acquiring Paul George. So I thought, all right, well, then that's it. It has to be it. And that leads you back to Jimmy Butler. My problem with Jimmy Butler was a few years ago, the Sixers chose to rock and roll with Ben Simmons and Tobias Harris instead of Jimmy Butler. And at the time, I thought, you know what? I'll take it. Because I thought Ben Simmons, despite his shortcomings, and at that point in his career, despite the fact that he was very reluctant to shoot the ball, I thought stylistically, you have something that's akin to a Giannis light. I mean, very light. I mean, we're not going to say it's the same thing. It's not like saying Coke and Pepsi and then RC Cola and then whatever they sell. What is it? Summit Valley now, I think is what they sell at Aldi, but I love that cola. That's a good one. So pick your least favorite generic version of, like, that's where I thought Ben Simmons was. But stylistically, you surround him with shooters, and I thought, all right, I could still back having Ben Simmons. He was a number 1 overall pick after all. But with Jimmy Butler, the Sixers didn't want to give him the contract that he wanted, and a big part of it was they didn't like what the back end of a max deal was going to look like. And when people got really excited a few weeks ago about, hey, Pat Riley flamed him in public, perhaps now is the time to go out and get Jimmy Butler, I thought to myself, you already gave up the best years of what was going to be that contract. What the hell are you going to do giving the guy an extension and taking him into beyond the years that you didn't think he was going to be very productive? Why would you do that? So anyway, we come back to Paul George. Paul George is probably the best fit. If we could have lined all the players up, I would have probably said LeBron was 1, Paul George was number 2. And if you think about it, yes, a lot of it's going to come down to health. A lot of it is going to come down to the health of Paul George. Can he remain healthy? Can he be in your lineup for 65 games? You have to acknowledge the fact that at this point in his career, he has not shown an ability to play full seasons or to play enough 75-plus games or 70-plus game seasons. If you get him for 65, if you load manage him, and you do an effective job of load managing Joel Embiid, who obviously the entire thing rests on, this could be the second best team in the Eastern Conference. It could be. I mean, you have to zoom out a little bit. The Celtics were such a dominant team in the East a year ago. They went on to win the NBA championship. They lifted the Larry O'Brien trophy. Do I think in my heart of hearts that if the Celtics played in the West, they would have won the championship? No, I don't. Do I think that the Celtics would have looked as dominant en route to the NBA Finals if it hadn't been for massive injuries to every one of their opponents in the postseason? No. I actually think that, all things considered, the Celtics had a pretty easy run to the finals. And that even included the fact that Luka Doncic was massively banged up in that finals. So, again, tip of the cap to Boston, and I hate their teams, but you do have to give them credit. So, out of respect, you probably have to put the Celtics as the best team in the East. So then who's left? Do you think that the Milwaukee Bucks are the number 2 team in this conference? I don't. One, they have Glenn Rivers. And let's be real about what Glenn Rivers is. He's not a particularly good coach. He's a guy who has long been riding on his reputation from decades ago. He's a guy who has led multiple stacked teams that have included MVP candidates and actual MVP winners. And he pulled off one championship with a loaded Celtics team. And you could argue, and I certainly would, that the fact that he didn't win more than one with that Celtics team kind of proves that he's a bit of a fraud. I don't believe in Milwaukee. I don't. And I think the fact that they traded away Drew Holiday, effectively gifted him to the Celtics. And by the way, Drew Holiday was a massive part of the Celtics winning that title. I don't view the Bucks as the number 2 team. So then who else is there? Well, it's not Cleveland. Could it be New York? Lay out the case. The Knicks beat the Sixers in the postseason. Why? Well, there were a few reasons. Most notably, Tobias Harris stinks. Now he's gone. Now, the real reason is because the Knicks had guys who knew exactly what their roles were. The Knicks went into every game knowing exactly what to expect of every player on the team. Yes, Jalen Brunson is an absolute killer. Yes, Josh Hart serves his role. Yes, Dante DiVincenzo served his role. Hartenstein, who they just lost, that is going to hurt them. They all had roles. Julius Randle, they lost early in the season. He'll be back. OG Anunoby decided to sign a massive deal with them to return. And oh, by the way, they traded, 5 first-round picks to get Mikal Bridges to complete the Nova Knicks. If you're asking me which team is the number 2 team in the conference, it very well could be the Knicks. However, Paul George coming to town, along with Andre Drummond, the best backup big Joel Embiid has ever had, along with some version of whatever Eric Gordon has left, a former Rocket, so of course Daryl Morey had to go out and get him. You put those guys together on this team, They managed to also bring back Kelly Oubre, which I think is going to be an underrated signing for them. He played very good minutes for them last year. He's going to have a whole lot more open shots now that they have a legitimate number 3 option in Paul George. You put all that together, there's a case to be made that the Sixers could be the second best team. Now, in fairness, when we get into the season, we know that Joel Embiid at some point is going to get hurt and miss time. We likely know that Paul George at some point is going to get hurt and miss time. They might not finish number 2 in the conference. In fact, I would say it's more likely that the Sixers finish 4th than they do 2nd, and a lot of that comes down to health and load management. But when you get into a playoff series where coaches shorten the bench, and Nick Nurse is going to run a lot of his starters into the ground the same way that Tom Thibodeau did with the Knicks, which ultimately probably hurt the Knicks significantly, that's where I think you're going to see the Sixers team really take the next step. Now, I get it. If you've looked at playoff P, as they sometimes call him, if you look at Paul George's stats in the postseason, they leave a lot to be desired. I'm not going to make it sound like he's the second coming of Michael Jordan. He certainly is not. But one thing that Paul George is going to have here that he has not had anywhere else is that night in and night out, he really is going to be expected to be the number 3 option. He has the ability to take over multiple games and to be the number 1 option, which is great. But like if you think back, when he played for Indiana, he was the number 1 option. When he played in OKC, he really was the number 1 option. And when he went to the Clippers, he was supposed to be the number 2 option behind Kawhi Leonard, who couldn't stay healthy, which kind of forced Paul George into being the number 1 guy. When the Clippers went out and they made the trade for James Harden, there was that weird kind of power struggle. Nobody really knew what the dynamic was going to be. But Paul George, in a lot of cases, because Kawhi couldn't remain healthy, Paul George found himself often in the number 1 or number 2 scoring role. With this team, he's the number 3. He is a significant improvement over Tobias Harris. Remember, Tobias Harris was getting paid in the high 30s, low 40s. Paul George comes into town making 50. Okay? We all know it's a lot of money, and it is a significant amount of money. And if Paul George doesn't perform, Sixers fans are going to get all over him. However, you have to remember, if you're a Sixers fan, this guy chose to play here. He knew what to expect. He just left a team that had James Harden. I have to imagine that there was at least a conversation at some point between Paul George and James Harden. What's it like to play in Philly? Now, listen, there could very well still be very hurt feelings between James Harden and Daryl Morey. And maybe he said, don't trust Daryl Morey, but it's a great city to play for. It's a great place to be. It's a great place to live. Maybe Harden had nothing good to say. Maybe he had all the positive things to say. We don't know. Eventually, when Paul George meets with the media, I hope that the media ask him some of those questions. I don't expect him to, bare his soul. I don't expect him to give a ton of insight. I don't expect him to say, James Harden said, the fans are hard to play for, but, it's a good place to play. But he said Daryl Morey sucks ass. I don't expect that. Okay? But I do imagine that it came up at least once. What's it like to play there? Remember, the Clippers were still a suitor up until the end. The Magic were rumored to be a suitor up until they signed KCP. Is this a byproduct of Paul George not having a lot of options? Maybe. Could it also just be that he was excited to play here? It could be. He's going to get paid copious amounts of money to be the number 3 option on this team. And again, has the ability at any given time to take over a game and to be your number 1 option. And ultimately, if we're being fair and we're being honest, the one thing you can't do is go into another postseason where Joel Embiid is viewed as the guy who's taken the last shot. He's not that guy. However, Paul George, as this number 3 option who gets to pick his spots, who could maybe become what Jimmy Butler was for this team for that 1 year, maybe Paul George becomes the guy who takes over in the 4th quarter. Maybe he's the guy who finds his rhythm throughout the game and feels empowered to take that final shot. And if nothing else, his gravity is going to create open shots along the perimeter for his teammates. It's going to create more space for Joel Embiid in the post. And in fact, it's going to also create a little bit more breathing room for Tyrese Maxey. It is ultimately the perfect signing for the team. And now we all sit back and wait. We all sit back and wait to see what this is going to look like in action. I'd love to know. Let me know in the comments. How many games do you think Joel Embiid, Tyrese Maxey, and Paul George will all suit up together this year? Let me know in the comments because I'm honestly intrigued. I'm guessing it's going to be like 50, give or take. We know the two of the guys have health concerns. Tyrese Maxey, we're gonna hope and pray and wish him a good bill of health. All right, I'm going to go over to the comments really quick and see if there was anything else around the Sixers. And if not, we're going to go to the Flyers. And then we have the U.S. men's national team that we have to touch on here at some point. Brandon Ficara checks in with 52. Sean C. says 44 on games played by the trio, by the big three. I did see, by the way, that Tim Bontemp went on to ESPN yesterday to Get Up and said that the Sixers have the best big three in the entire league, and it's not even close. That's interesting. I think he might have a point. I know that the Celtics fans are going to get upset because they're going to view Drew Holiday, Jaylen Brown, and Jason Tatum as a better big three. I will once again point back to the fact that were it not for a very easy path to the finals, I think that there are still real concerns there. There should be concerns between Tatum and Brown because Brown was thought of as being wildly overpaid, but I would argue looked significantly more impactful and more dominant for the Celtics than Tatum ever did. It's neither here nor there. Not my problem. I don't think the Celtics are ever going to win another title with those two, but they at least won a championship. The Sixers haven't gotten out of the second round, so who am I to say, right? Jay Grebby also checks in and says 48, and then says add in the playoffs 68. All right. So we're seeing a nice deep playoff run. I like it, Jay. I like it. All right, let's get over to what happened with the Philadelphia Flyers. Last week, the draft is going on. I'm in Outer Banks. I said, you know what? I'm going to take my microphone with me just in case something notable happens. And I will tell you that every year that I've taken my family down to Outer Banks for summer, some big news has happened with the Flyers. Every year. There's either been a trade, there's been a signing, there's been a firing. A couple of years ago, it was the rumor came out about Gaudreau, and then the Flyers essentially saying, like, no, we're not interested in flipping the switch to Gaudreau. That was the same summer that Gaudreau was essentially like waiting, allegedly, reportedly, had been waiting for the Philadelphia Flyers to clear some space so he could sign because this is where he wanted to play. Ultimately went to Columbus. So I knew for a fact that as soon as I got down to Outer Banks, down to Duck, that I was going to get hit with some kind of news. And sure as shit, it happened. On Sunday, not this Sunday, but the Sunday before, the 23rd, I pull up to, I forget what the name of the place is, like the Whalehead Club. It's by the Currituck Lighthouse. My family were sitting out at this like nice gazebo on the water. The kids are watching the birds swoop in and like pick up fish. Our daughter's very distraught about the fact that the birds are eating the fish. The boys think it's the funniest thing ever. Everybody's looking for crabs. It's a great time. And then I get a phone call from Anthony Sanfilippo who says, we can't report this yet, but Mishkov's coming over. I'm like, what do you mean Mishkov's coming over? And he's like, it's going to happen. He's getting, like, it's happening. Get ready for it. And I go, Aunt, I'm on vacation. I do have my mic, but our house isn't ready yet. What do you want me to do? He's like, well, I don't know. We'll try to figure it out. He's like, well, I'm doing a father-son day, but I'll figure it out. And then I get in touch with Bundy, and then Bundy's like, oh, boy, so it's a Sunday. And we're like, all right, we have to do it. So that day happens. It becomes apparent. Mishkov is coming over. Awesome. I get my mic out that I was smart enough to bring. We do an emergency episode of Snow the Goalie. And on that episode, I said something to the extent of, if Mishkov comes over early, and they had really expected him to come over in 2026, I said, if he comes over early, I think it changes their timeline a bit. I think it probably changes their plan. It kind of has to. He's the best prospect in their system. He's the best player that the Philadelphia Flyers have had as a prospect in over a decade. He's certainly a better prospect than Quitter Gauthier. So I thought, all right, well, if you have Matvei Mishkov, does it change your draft plan? They were slated to draft number 12 overall and number 32 overall from that Florida Panthers pick. That was part of the trade for Claude Giroux. They sent him away when he only gave them one team. He ended up with Owen Tippett. It was a pretty good deal. I'll give Chuck Fletcher a little bit of credit here. Fine. It was good trade. Fine. Chuck. Matvei Mishkov comes over, and I'm like, all right, where are we going? Because if this moves up the timeline, you need to then add another impact player or an impact prospect. I don't expect them to go out and go bonkers in free agency. I didn't expect them to go after like a Marner. I didn't expect them to go after a Reinhardt. But I thought, like, if it's going to change things, you need to have another guy who could potentially get to the Flyers at some point in the next year or two that you can start to sell tickets around along with Mishkov. So my target was Ivan Demidov because I said there's another impact Russian forward. And the one thing that the Flyers have been exceptional at, it's been getting Russian players over to the U.S. to play for their team. Ivan Fedotov, right? Fedotov had been viewed as being totally out of the picture. He signed a contract with the Flyers. Shortly thereafter, gets put in a van and goes off to serve his mandatory military service, right? Okay, fine. We thought that's dead and done. End of last season, out of nowhere, Fedotov is stateside. Contract terminated by the KHL. He plays a few games for the Flyers. He's a massive human being. He's going to be their backup netminder this year. They bring over Mishkov. They figure out, or Mishkov figures out, his agent figure out how to get him out of that deal early. He's here early. Demidov is under contract for one more year with his KHL team. And I thought, all right, perhaps this is another one of those times where a Russian player under contract with KHL is going to scare away some possible suitors. And that's what you saw, because I thought Demidov was the second best player in this draft behind Celebrini. And you saw him start to fall. And when we talked on Snow the Goalie, the whole thing was, hey, to get up from 12, you might have to jump from 12 to 7 with the Senators. And if Demidov is falling, but you don't think he's going to fall all the way to 7, which there was almost no chance he would, you're going to have to try to trade up to 4. And it's easier to convince a team like Columbus at number 4 to trade back to 7 than it is to get them to trade from 4 to 12. And at some point along the way, I went, well, if it's going to take you a bunch of picks just to move up to 7, and you might have to trade Scott Laughton or Joel Farabee or Morgan Frost or whatever to get up to 7, you're going to then have to sweeten the pot again with perhaps another one of those guys along with other picks to get up to 4. Why not just cut out the middleman at 7? Why not just talk to Columbus? What do you want? What's the price? And it sounds like the price was 3 first-round picks. It sounds like it was going to be 12, it was going to be 32, and then it might have been the Colorado pick next year, or it might have been that they wanted the Flyers pick next year, which you can't part with because the 25 draft is going to be better. The Flyers, in theory, should suck. That should be a good pick. It might even be a lottery pick. You would hope it's going to be a top 5 pick if you're smart and you want to see a perennial contender. If you're happy with the torts culture and the really kind of treading water in hockey purgatory, then whatever, you can have pick 16 or whatever, and this is never going to get better. Fine. You could live that life. I choose not to, but you can. I wanted Demidov. And I wanted Demidov because I thought if the Flyers do what the Flyers probably will do, which is bring back John Tortorella, have a team that's going to sort of compete for a playoff spot, sort of be on the bubble, probably pick around 12 again next year, I'd rather go for a guy that I do think could be a top 2 guy in most drafts than Demidov. They were unable to make the move up to 4. And then Montreal took Demidov at 5, so it wouldn't even have mattered if you had the potential workings of a deal worked out with Ottawa at number 7. So they missed out on Demidov. Then the Sharks jumped the Flyers. They move up to 11. The Sharks take Dickinson, the defenseman from London, Ontario. And that's a guy that the Flyers were really interested in. And that's where it seemed like the Flyers panicked. That's where you started to see the cameras go to the Flyers table, to Danny Briere, to Brent Flair. And I honestly think that they panicked. I think that they freaked out. And once Dickinson came off the board, I'm convinced. Now, I haven't gone over to Voorhees to poke and prod. I haven't shot off 7 or 8 texts to people because I genuinely don't care that much. But I think that the Flyers panicked. They moved back. They made a trade with Minnesota to pick up a 3rd-round pick next year. They moved back 1 spot. Didn't matter. It's totally fine. I think they panicked because they wanted to move back again. But I think that the NHL is also a business, and the Flyers took a lot of time to complete that trade to move back 1 spot and pick up a 3rd-round pick. And I'm also convinced that if the Flyers had tried to pull the same thing when they were on the clock at 13 and took another 6 or 7 minutes to bog down the draft again, that Gary Bettman probably would have thrown a hissy fit. And I think the Flyers wanted to move down from 13. You cannot convince me that they looked at their board, they took everything into account. They talked to all the scouts and they said, yes, Jet Lachenko, great name, by the way. Jet Lachenko is absolutely worth being the number 13 pick in this draft. Now, I get it. When we went into the draft, we said Celebrini's number 1, Demidov's probably number 2, and then there's a bit of a drop. And that maybe like picks 5 through 15 or so are about the same skill. Jet Lachenko on some lists was around 18 or 19. On others, he was in the mid to low 20s. Now, I didn't scout Jet Lachenko, all right? I don't scout any of these guys. I have too much stuff going on. The day job takes a lot of time. Hosting multiple shows takes a lot of time. Writing stuff takes a lot of time. I don't have time to sit back and watch Jet Lachenko. I wasn't scouting Dickinson. I wasn't scouting Demidov. I wasn't scouting Celebrini. However, or Hellenius, who everybody was then freaking out that they didn't draft Hellenius. They took Lachenko instead. I look at it and I said, all right, I'm going to defer in some way to some of the pundits and to some of the scouts and to some of the draft experts. And when you move back to 13, when you go into a draft that is supposed to be a draft that you're trying to get an impact player because you went into last year saying rebuild, 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 this to me was a failure. I don't have a nice way to say it. I don't have a way to sugarcoat it. I think the Flyers screwed up. I think that this should serve as a warning to the Philadelphia Flyers. This is why you don't see teams rebuild and compete for a playoff spot at the same time. The reason it doesn't happen is because it is virtually impossible for multiple years to draft around hockey purgatory in the middle of the first round and find stud players consistently in that area. It doesn't happen. It doesn't. Last year was supposed to be a bottom-out year. It was supposed to be a tacit, and there was a tacit acknowledgement by the organization. We're rebuilding. We know that we need high-end players in order to build something that will turn into a cup-contending team for a long period of time. Danny Briere came on Snow the Goalie and on the Press Row Show. So did Keith Jones. So did Dan Hilferty. They all said the same thing, but they have a coach who raises their floor too high. They have a coach who approaches every game like it's his last game coaching in the league, who scratches young players, who puts vets in when you just say this is supposed to be a rebuild. You're not getting enough of a look at enough of the young guys in your system. What the hell are you doing? It reared its ugly head in this draft. Because if the Flyers had done what they should have done, if the Flyers had had a somewhat bottom-out year, John Tortorella is never going to let a team become a team that's going to be the number 1 or 2 pick in the draft. Fine. Let's say the Flyers don't win a bunch of games. They don't feel the need to push for the playoffs the way that they did for the last month and a half of the season. The Flyers probably end up with the 8th pick in the draft, somewhere around there. Moving up from number 8 to number 4 and making a trade with Columbus gets you Demidov. It probably costs you number 8, number 32, and something else. But to convince Columbus, who sucks, they suck out loud. They are a bad hockey team. To convince them to move back 4 spots in a draft where they weren't going to take the Russian player, because they didn't, and in a draft where a lot of people thought that, hey, picks 5 through 15 are virtually the same. It's not hard to move 4 spots. It is hard to convince a team to move back 8. That is a byproduct of deciding to go for a playoff spot. I'm going to get to the comments here in a second because I see a lot of them coming in, but we need to be honest here. I know that when the Flyers traded Walker, it really hurt them on the blue line. It did. And I think that the Walker deal is actually what killed their chance of making the playoffs. I think that they had enough injuries on the blue line that as they started to collapse down the stretch, it was very clear that Walker was a significant piece of the puzzle, and they were just never able to replace him. But, they could have made more moves. They had 2 opportunities in the last calendar year, at least, to move Scott Laughton for high picks, including a team in the Metropolitan Division. I think we talked about on Snow the Goalie. The Rangers were interested in him. The Senators have been interested in him. Apparently, the Senators were once again interested in Scott Laughton potentially to move back from 7 to 12. Morgan Frost's name has been out there. Teams have been inquiring about Joel Farabee. There have been teams like Toronto that have been inquiring about Rasmus Ristolainen, who then just, well, he ends up out of the lineup whenever it seems like a deal with Toronto has gotten close, at least on one occasion. Travis Sanheim was given a no-movement clause by Chuck Fletcher. That deal, remember last year, before that kicked in, he was almost sent away to St. Louis. There are players on this roster that teams want, but for some reason, this team continues to hang on to them. At some point, you have to cut bait. At some point, you have to sit back and say, this team isn't good enough. And in order for the team to be good, you have to trade away some of the players with value and actually reset. Hit the reset button. And if this coach doesn't want to be the one to do it, move him somewhere else. Move him into the front office. Put Brad Marsh in charge. Put someone else in charge for a year or two. You can still have the culture, but do it with somebody who's not going to raise your floor. Do it with somebody who's not going to fight for every last point and cost you valuable positioning in the draft. You can't pick at 12 for the next 2 years and then try to sell the fans that like, oh yeah, the rebuild worked. No, that does not work. That has almost never worked in the history of the National Hockey League. I'm going to go to the comments because there's a very big elephant in the room, and there's one piece that I didn't mention that has garnered significant interest, and is a guy who, if this team truly is trying to rebuild and they want to get assets, there's one guy that they can sell off right now and probably pick up a first-round pick and probably pick up additional assets and maybe even a change of scenery prospect, you know, like Owen Tippett was. All right, I'm going to go over here. Let me go to the comments really quick. Sean C. says, the culture's been reset. The Flyers need to trade Scott Laughton and Travis Konecny. Laughton is a great guy, but a great locker room guy, but it seems like they blew it. If you can get a mid-round pick for him, you have to do it. The problem with Laughton is that they had an offer of a first-round pick last year. And they had another offer around the trade deadline that was also very attractive, a high pick. And at the time, Danny Briere met the media and said, we're not looking to sell off Scott Laughton for nothing. We're not looking to sell him for fair value. We want more than fair value. Scott Laughton's a wonderful person. He's a wonderful player for what he is. He's not somebody you build the team around. He's not an integral piece of this team. Because by the time this team is ready to potentially be a perennial cup contender, he's going to be past his prime. The timeline doesn't work out. I digress. We'll keep going. Sean also says that Konecny doesn't fit the timeline. A Shane Pinto trade makes too much sense for both sides. The Flyers were actively involved in a negotiation last year that would have sent Morgan Frost to Ottawa and brought Shane Pinto back here. Didn't work out. Then Pinto got suspended for sports betting. Became a big thing. Pinto apparently has made it known that he doesn't want to have anything to do with being in Ottawa anymore. You have to think that that's going to give leverage to a team that's trying to acquire him. We'll see how that pans out. Ottawa's a mess. Claude Giroux chose to go back and play there. God. Jay Grebby says, wonder if Konecny makes sense for Seattle. Ron Francis has said they need scoring. Maybe we could pluck Shane Wright and a first since he's yet to break into the NHL. I don't know what Shane Wright's ever going to be, but that you could convince me that that sort of fits the mold of what I just said a little bit ago. First round pick and a change of scenery guy. I'm sure Seattle's going to try to sell everybody on the fact that they really believe in Shane Wright and they think that he's going to be a massive part of what they're doing going forward. I don't hate that. If that were a deal that were offered, you get a Seattle pick that could actually be valuable and a guy in Shane Wright who you would hope can slot in here and you'd give at least a year or two of NHL time to see what he is. Can play alongside Matvei Mishkov. You can see if there's chemistry there. You can see if they can grow together. I don't hate that. I'm sure somebody does, but I don't. Let's see. Joe Papel asks how my Russian's coming along. A Snow the goalie, close connection to Mishkov. I joked when they drafted Mishkov that I was going to learn Russian in time. That like by the time he got here in 2026, I was going to speak Russian because I speak a few other languages. I did take intensive Russian for a little bit in college. I audited the class. I wasn't getting credit for it. It was an intensive Russian class. It was 5 days a week. There were two professors. One, I think, taught on Tuesday, Thursday, and the other taught on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I think 2 times a week, the class was at 10 o'clock, which I could make. And then the other days, it was like 8 o'clock, which I just refused to. So I didn't end up sticking with the class. I do remember some stuff. I do remember some of the Cyrillic alphabet. I do remember how to spell my name in Cyrillic. I do remember how to introduce myself and how to ask who somebody is and how to introduce someone else. So if Matvei Mishkov ever wants to come on Snow the Goalie, I can at least greet him, introduce myself, introduce Anthony and Bundy. And at that point, it's like the, you guys remember the Family Guy episode where Stewie and Brian, I think it was the road to Rhode Island, they're sitting in the back of a truck, and there's like a Hispanic guy in the back there of the truck with him. And he says, Brian goes, "Hola, me llamo es Brian. Nosotros somos," I forget what else he says. And the guy looks at him and goes, "Hey, you know what? That was actually pretty good, except when you say me llamo es Brian, you don't need the S, just me llamo Brian." "You're kidding, right?" Oh, he goes, "Nope." And he goes, "You speak English?" He's like, "Nope, just that little phrase and this one explaining it." "You're kidding, right? Gay?" That's kind of what it's going to be like if I talk to Mishkov. He's going to get all excited. I'm going to say, "Очень приятно, меня зовут Russell." He's going to go, "Ah! There's media that speaks Russian here?" And I'm going to go, "I don't know. Das vidanya." Going to work on it. It sucks. If I had stuck with Russian, I'd have been in such better shape. I took French in high school, in addition to German and Spanish. I have all these like Quebecois-speaking French Canadians. And when I was like down in the locker room after games, I'm like, I could have used French here. We have no Spanish-speaking players. I think that the Flyers had a German-speaking player. Who was it? Was it Raffel? Was the German-speaking player on the team a few years ago? That was it. I don't get any German speakers. I get no Spanish speakers. Like if I did, we'd be great. We'd be in excellent shape. Anyway. Sean says, move had to be made, or that was an Embiid one. Hold on. Sean usually checks in about the Flyers. Here we go. It's worth noting that the Ducks, while not making any type of splash yesterday, are $6 million from the cap floor, so they have moves in the canister. That's a big thing. And this is the argument that I've had some people make to me behind the scenes from the Flyers side of things, is that the reason they're not kind of hitting the accelerator is because Danny Briere has now been tasked with this, well, we have to clear out all this dead money. We have to clear out a bunch of bad Chuck Fletcher contracts. And like, there's truth to that. And the last thing that you want to do is try to clear out that money and attach picks just to rid yourself of a deal like Fletcher did with Shane Gostisbehere. You don't want to do that. You also don't want to prevent yourself from having some real cap flexibility by saying, all right, we're going to eat 75% of this deal. They don't want to do that. They did buy out Cam Atkinson for a little bit of flexibility. It's like $3.7 million this year and I think it's 1.8 next year that they're going to have against their cap for that buyout. But they're not in the same position that Anaheim is. Anaheim stinks. Quitter Gautier's out there. It's entirely possible that they could try to sell themselves on the idea that they're going to get free agents. They won't, but they at least have that. Brandon says he has no problems with the Flyers right now. There's no downside to patience. Sean says if the Flyers don't trade for one of Zegras or Pinto, questions need to be asked. I think a hockey trade or two needs to be made as long as both Laughton and Konecny are on the roster. I think that there's a little bit of truth to that. I do think that if we get through this entire offseason and both of those guys are still here, given the amount of interest around both, I'm going to have significant questions going into the year. To me, it'll be a failure again. It'll be another one of those things where you say you had players that teams are interested in. You had the opportunity to deal them in the offseason. And I want to get back to Konecny in a little bit because I still think that there's a move to be made there. Joe asks if I think that Mishkov is already here, but they're just not saying no. Even if he is here, he doesn't have a visa yet. That's the one holdup that's always been what was perceived to be the big holdup around Mishkov is he needs a visa. And that because they weren't able to negotiate, I say they, I have to be careful because, of course, the Flyers had no idea about anything that was going on. It was just between the player and the agent and St. Petersburg. When the player or the agent or whomever in Russia figured out the way to work it out with St. Petersburg to let Mishkov go early, there has to be proof of employment in order for a player to be able to get his visa and get over here. So even if St. Petersburg had said a month ago, we're going to let Matvei go, he still had to come to an agreement with the Flyers. There still had to be an employment in order for him to apply for that visa. The Flyers couldn't have just said 2 months ago, hey, good chance this kid's going to come over. U.S. Visa Office, give us a visa for the player. They're going to come back and say no. So there's a little bit of a holding pattern, and that's a big part of it. He's not going to be at dev camp. They expect him to be at training camp in another month or so. He should be fine. That'll be fine. Sean C. also notes that he's been on Instagram showing that he's training in Russia. So we got that. Eric Schmidt says, congrats on starting your own thing. Only one with some around town with the Flyers rebuild. I have no idea what all that means, but I appreciate it. Eric, thank you so much. Let's see. There are a few other things here. Sean wants to see a spicy episode of me and Ant arguing about the rebuild. I'll just tell you this, Sean. I had a text exchange yesterday with Ant and with Bundy. Bundy was more on my side. Now, I don't know if that'll come across on the next episode. Ant is very much in this mentality of how the Flyers should approach this offseason, and he's very wrong about it. And his version of what the Flyers need to do is a lot of the reason that the Flyers have been stuck in hockey purgatory for a decade. So we'll talk about that over in that show. Jay Grebby says, part of why moving TK makes too much sense, especially if they insist on keeping Laughton. Laughton and Coots can carry the culture. So the Konecny part of this is interesting. And I'll throw up a few more comments on the screen as we get to this Konecny point. Then I want to get to the men's national team. Linda Joseph says, this is what happens when you win games for culture during the early stage of a rebuild. And he's right. The problem with the Konecny negotiation now, you might have seen it yesterday. Sam Reinhart, who plays center, who just helped the Panthers win the Stanley Cup, who scored 67 goals between the regular season and playoffs, just signed an 8-year contract worth about $8.6 million per year. Travis Konecny's camp had hoped for around $10 million. 10. Or at least that was the thought. You always come in high, because that's part of a negotiation. The team comes in low, the player comes in high. They try to meet in the middle. There had been rumors towards the end of the regular season that Travis Konecny could have been looking for $10 million, or at least his agent might have been looking for $10 million a year, which is crazy. But, I mean, I don't think I've F-bombed on the show. Sometimes I will, but for the sake of our first show here, I'll try not to. But that's effing crazy, all right? $10 million for any player on the Flyers right now is insane. Nobody deserves anywhere near that money. I don't think anybody deserves $9 million on this team. You could even make the case that if we had to hand out contracts to every player that's on the roster right now, the most a guy could maybe get is 8. Which brings us back to Konecny. Sam Reinhart just signed that deal. 8 years, $8.6 million per year. There is, and if you haven't seen it before, there are a bunch of graphics going around right now about the tax advantage that Florida has with no state income tax. It is a massive advantage for Florida. There's no getting around it. And there is also a thought that perhaps Reinhart took a little bit more of a discount because they just won a Stanley Cup. He's trying to give the team a little bit of flexibility because they don't want to just win one title. They want to create a dynasty down there, and who could blame them? Optically, you cannot, if you're the Flyers, sit back and say, we're going to now pay Travis Konecny, who's never eclipsed 70 points in a season. We're going to give Travis Konecny $9 million, $9.5 million. $9.75 million. God forbid $10 million. We're going to pay him more than a guy who just won a Stanley Cup at a premium position, who scored 67 goals across the regular season and postseason. We're going to optically, we're going to sell the fan base on Travis Konecny being worth more. There is no chance that works. There is zero chance that goes well. I like Travis Konecny. I think Travis Konecny is a wonderful guy. I think he's well-liked in that locker room. I think he's done yeoman's work in terms of trying to do the right thing for this team, be the kind of player this team needs, heart and soul kind of guy. Wonderful player. Not worth $9.5 million. Based on the Reinhart deal, not worth $9 million. You can even bring the Gensel contract into it. If I were the Flyers, I look at two things. Do you want to save money on the annual value by extending him to a longer deal? Or are you fine with paying a little bit higher than you should to have a short-term contract? I don't like either. I don't think either option is the way to go. I don't think you could pay him more than $9 million. I don't think they should pay him more than $8 million. They'll probably sign him to like 8.5, maybe 9. I don't think they should pay him more than 8. And if they were going to pay him 8, it should be on like a 4-year deal, 5 max. I always come back to this. I know I look very tall. I'm sure that everybody who's watching the show right now thinks that I'm like a really rock solid 6'5", 6'5". Let me know in the comments. Probably think I'm like 6'5", maybe 6'8". I'm at a standing desk right now. I look very tall. Very built, svelte even. I'm 5'6". Travis Konecny, I think, is 5'7". He's listed at 5'7". I'm pretty sure he's 5'6". I weigh 183. I'm pretty sure he weighs about like a $185, $187. Now, he's obviously in significantly better shape. You cannot convince me that a guy who's my stature, who plays the way that Konecny plays with reckless abandon, is going to hold up into his mid-30s. There's no chance. Zero. You can point back to Martin St. Louis if you want. That's not a very good comparison. They're not the same player. Konechny's body will not hold up into his mid-30s, playing at the level that they're going to need him to play at to justify a $9 million cap hit. There's no way. Which leads me to this. If I were the Flyers, and if I were looking at what a rebuild is supposed to be, where you do sometimes have to make tough decisions and sell players that you think are even your best player, and there's a case to be made that Konechny is their best player, this team isn't close to competing. This team still needs to bottom out more in order to get high-level prospects like a Matvei Michkov, who also you have to hope hits, right, and actually does translate well to the NHL. You need to get a few of those guys and build around them to have a perennial cup contender. Travis Konechny's age, the miles on his body already, and the miles that will be added to his body, it doesn't work. Even if this team is ready in, say, 2 years, 3 years, Travis Konechny's best playing days will be behind him. And then you're going to be staring down the barrel of a $9 million plus cap hit. And at that point, you're going to have probably a similar conversation that you've had about Sean Couturier right now, where you say, we hope that Couturier can play 65, 70 games. You can load manage him. You can figure out a way to prevent him from having the drastic drop-off that he did in the second half of last season. But like, you're setting yourself up to have the same problem again. And the worst part is you'll be having that conversation in the midst of, we need enough money to go out and attract that number one defenseman in free agency. Or we need to have that money to go out and attract a top centerman to center Matvei Michkov and maybe another prospect that hopefully will have blossomed by then. Konechny's a wonderful player, but his timeline doesn't add up. And I truly think that the Flyers are in this weird spot where they have to appease a head coach who wants to win every game, and they're going to feel the need. Briere has a bit of a personal connection with Laughton. They're going to roll into next season with Scott Laughton after having yet another opportunity to trade him for a good pick. They're going to probably roll back in with Travis Konecny, who, again, is a wonderful player, but they will likely extend him to too much money and too much term. The real move here is to trade him and to get picks. They have 3 first-round picks in 2025 because they dealt that Florida pick to Edmonton, and now they're going to get Edmonton's first. They'll have a Colorado pick, which probably won't be very good because Colorado's a very good team. They'll have their own pick, which should be very good because they should suck. And then they'll have the Edmonton pick, which also probably shouldn't be very good or won't be very good because Edmonton's a very good team. In a best-case scenario, you're probably going to have like number 24 and 26 between Colorado and Edmonton in some way. And then whatever the Flyers pick ends up being. Next year's draft is viewed as a very deep one. If there were ever a time to say, thank you for your service to the team, but we're going to pick up another draft pick in the first round next year. We're going to pick up another conditional pick in the following draft, and we're going to pick up a change of scenery player. If you want it to be the Seattle trade that was brought up earlier with a right, that works. But the idea of extending Konechny at that kind of cap hit makes no sense. None at all. Nobody can convince me otherwise. We'll talk about it over on Snow the Goalie, but there's no chance. I just don't see it. I do not see it. let me see. Oh, this was good. Hold on. Sean brought up this thing that apparently Chuck Fletcher didn't want to hire Torts. There was a consultant firm that was brought in that suggested him. That is true. Chuck, for all of his flaws, knew that Torts eats GMs alive and knew that he was pretty much out of rope and that if they brought in Torts, Torts was going to get paid a lot of money and was going to outlast him. And that's exactly what happened. They also went to Barry Trotz. Chuck didn't want Barry Trotz. That didn't work. I think he wanted to push over coach, and I think he wanted to extend his tenure as a GM, which who could blame him? There's a case to be made that John Tortorella will go down as the worst potential hire in that time frame that the Flyers will have ever made. Not because he's a bad coach. He's a very good coach. But because what they needed to do was bottom out, and he actively prevents them from being able to bottom out the way that they need in order to get the high-level prospects in town and then adjust the rest of the roster around it. But we'll see. We'll see where it goes. Let's see. Sean C. asks who my dynasty team is going to be with the college football game coming back. EA Sports has college football game coming back. I don't know. I barely get to play video games anymore. Can I tell you how sad that is, Sean? Like, I was a massive gamer. I was. And then I had kids. I have 4 kids. I have a wife that I love. So I spend time with her at night. We watch a show. And we both pass out because having 4 kids is not easy. 4 kids under 10. It's a lot. I look forward to, I think that when I'm like 50, even though I don't want to ever think about having to be 50, I'm pretty sure that like when I hit my 40s and then my 50s, like I'll go back to being a gamer. And it's going to be like weird because I'm going to feel like it's something you're supposed to do when you're young, but like I'm going to make up for lost time here. Every so many months, I get a text on a group chat about like the new Call of Duty game. And every time I'm like, guys, I don't really like Call of Duty, but I like having the feeling of like being in my bedroom as a kid and like playing Halo 2 on Xbox Live. And so then I convince myself that I'm going to love playing this new Call of Duty game. And then I do well and I enjoy it. And we play really hard for like 2-3 weeks. And I'm like, all right, cool. Like this is that feeling. We've restored that feeling. And then everybody gets busy again. And it's like I have this like $60 or $70. I don't know. It's like the digital purchase. So I don't even know how much I pay. But it's probably like $70 now on PS5. And then the game's gone. And then I don't care anymore. And then a few months later, I get a text about another one. I think there's another Call of Duty game coming out. The thing that had me the most excited, I'll talk about this on another episode at some point maybe, is I got really excited because I saw that there was a possibility that Microsoft was going to allow for some of their long-term exclusive games to also be on other platforms, and that there was a chance that Halo could move to PlayStation, that like you might be able to like cross-platform play Halo. I will tell you right now, if Halo is ever available for PS5, I love my children. I love my wife. If Halo comes to PS5, they will not see me for at least a month. I will dedicate every bit of non-work time I have to poning noobs at Halo. I have a different love for that game. And now we move on. All right. I think we're good. I think we can move on to the final thing, which is the U.S. men's national team flaming out last night in a game that Uruguay played well. They played well enough. The ref, you don't ever like to blame the refs. Some people like blaming the refs. I'm not a big blame the ref guy. This ref was in over his head. I'm not going to pull up the clip here because YouTube will take down the whole video if I do, but there is a sequence in the game where the ref goes to give a yellow card to the U.S., which when a yellow card comes out, the game stops until he books the player, he writes down his notes on the back of the card, and then there's a free kick. For whatever reason, the ref pulled out the yellow, went to start writing, and then allowed an advantage, a play on, which you cannot do. That's not how it works. You can, as a ref, mentally have the note that you're going to give a player a yellow card at the next like dead ball, but you don't pull out the yellow have most of the players stop on the field and then allow a play on. That's not how that works. I have never in my entire life, in many years of playing soccer, coaching soccer, I have never seen that before. And I hope I never see it again. And if it weren't for Tim Ream managing to get a foot in on the shot attempt, that would have actually put Uruguay up 1-0 at that point. But that game last night was an absolute disgrace. And it was a disgrace on a few levels. And so I'll see where some of these comments were from earlier in the show. But the U.S. men's national team is an embarrassment. Joe Papel says the same thing. Absolute embarrassment. The crazy thing is that after the last World Cup cycle, the U.S. went through this like long review of what they were going to do, because they missed a what was it? They missed a cup or they missed the Olympics, and then it came out that the U.S. was going to be part of the joint bid, the North American bid for the 2026 World Cup. And so the U.S. Soccer Federation said, well, we're going to review everything. And if you remember, there was a time where Gregg Berhalter was viewed as the coach, but not the coach. They were evaluating his status. The accusation came out about, I think it was around college time, about some kind of a domestic issue with his now wife from when they were in college. It was apparently leaked by Gio Reyna's family. Gio Reyna, who is one of the most talented players on the U.S. men's national team, who was also benched for who knows what reason in the last cup. There were a whole bunch of things, right? And after this long, extensive review with a very easy card to play, there was a domestic disturbance years ago. We didn't know about it. We're firing this coach and bringing somebody in who's better. The U.S. Soccer Federation said, no, we're going to bring back Gregg Berhalter to be the coach and to lead the U.S. team into the Copa America and then eventually to lead them into the World Cup. You cannot, and I mean cannot, under any circumstances, cannot play a World Cup in the U.S. in 2026 with Gregg Berhalter as your manager. You can't do it. There's a better chance that they will. Nico says Berhalter out. They probably will somehow figure out a way to rationalize it and to keep this guy in charge. And the U.S. will flame out in the group stage of the World Cup as they just did against in the Copa America. By the way, I think it's the first time ever, or at least the first time since the 80s, that a team that was hosting the Copa America got knocked out in the group stage. Congratulations, Gregg Berhalter in the U.S. You did something. And this brings me back to a thing that I saw that made me kind of go nuts. And Al Mack, who I haven't seen before, I don't think, checks in on YouTube. So thank you, Al. Says the ref was drunk. I wish that the ref had been drunk. That might have actually given us at least a little bit of hope for being able to turn things around. No, he just sucked at his job. Joe Papel says the only thing worse than the ref last night was the U.S. men's national team attack. He's quite right about that. I said on a version of this show before I actually launched the Russ Joy Show, it's over on the Joy Media account, that if I were the U.S. Soccer Federation and I had a World Cup coming up in 2 years, I would do everything in my power to go out and get Jürgen Klopp. And I know that it won't happen. And I know that a lot of people's reaction was, it is so far beneath Jürgen Klopp, who's been one of the best managers for a decade with Dortmund and with Liverpool. Like, there's no chance that he would ever come here. There's no chance that he would ever want to take over this team. Why would he? I'll tell you exactly what the reason is. I think Jürgen Klopp's a really smart man. I think Jürgen Klopp values his legacy. I think Jürgen Klopp has a flair for the dramatic. And I think that there is a part of Jürgen Klopp that if the U.S. Soccer Federation were serious, he would look at, all right, Jürgen Klinsmann didn't have the time of his life as the men's national team coach. But he did start a cultural shift, and I think he got scapegoated a bit towards the end. But Klopp might look at it and say, all right, if I go, I get to manage one of the biggest sports markets in the world. Not for soccer, but just in general, one of the biggest sports markets in the world. a place that can raise his national profile stateside in a way that it has never been before, and could potentially be the guy who takes the U.S. team on a deep World Cup run and is viewed as the guy who really sent a shot of adrenaline into a team and started a cultural phenomenon. A guy who fundamentally changed everything about the way that soccer was viewed in the U.S. I think that Klopp has that in him. I think Klopp he has to have thought about it. Has to have thought about it. Has had to have had this thought cross his mind. The German job isn't going to be open. It's not. I think Germany plays Spain today or tomorrow, later this week. No matter what happens in the Euro, Germany's not firing their manager. Klopp's not getting that job. I don't see any other country that he could want to go manage that's going to fire their manager anytime soon. The U.S. is it. Back up the Brinks truck, buy him a house in L.A., buy him an apartment in Manhattan, let the man live wherever he wants, let him do whatever he wants, let him overhaul the system as much as he wants. The idea of Jürgen Klopp as the face of the 2026 World Cup, which is what he would be the face of the World Cup for the U.S. men's national team, and he'd be the face of the host nation. There has to be something about that is intriguing to the man. There has to be. Maybe it's just me trying to will it into existence. I don't know. I'm going to go over to the comments here because I see that there are a bunch that have come in here since I started ranting. Sean mentions that the World Cup review took 14 months. They fired Berhalter, then rehired him. Matt Crocker needs to go if he doesn't have the pink slip handed out by next week. Al Mack asks, how did they rehire Berhalter after the scandals? Sean asks, is Berhalter the coach in Paris or will it be the U20 coach? I don't know. I don't think they're going to get rid of him, which is insane. Let's see. Berhalter has to be gone today, says Joe Papel. Sam S. checks in on YouTube, says U.S. Soccer spent over $1 million on a consulting firm to tell them to rehire Berhalter. Let's see. Al Mack does not believe that Klopp is going to come here. Says it's been like a 2-month binge vacation. He's not leaving. It's possible. Sean mentions Pep Guardiola as a potential hire as he spends practically all of his time off in New York, but the timeline doesn't fit. I agree with that. Let's see. Gio had him as a manager. I think Pulisic also had him as a manager at Dortmund. We'll have to see. Al Mack says, interesting thought. Jim Curtin, bad year, lets him step away with some dignity. No. I do think that Jim Curtin would have been on the radar had it not been for things falling apart the way that they have with the Union this year. I do think that there's a scenario that if Jim Curtin is ever fired by the Union or walks away from the Union, that he'll end up on the U.S. staff. He might even end up as an assistant coach. Maybe he ends up as like the U20 coach or something. I think that that's actually his next step. I don't think it's to another team in MLS. I don't think you're going to see Jim Curtin go over to Europe and coach. I think that the eye has to be on him managing at some level with the national team. That to me has always been the thing I've expected. Let's see. I like Allison's comment here. Says, I only know Flyers talk, so the other Philly sports go right over my head. Congrats on your new and own show. Don't have to argue with any other talking heads. That's right. I'll argue with the commenters, though, from time to time, which is fine. And I have to tell you that there's something I'm working on. I know that it's like I'll talk about that in a little bit. There's one other thing before we go today that I want to bring up as an idea, and I'll throw it to the comments, and they can let me know if it's smart or stupid. Dick over on X says, if he wasn't fired 30 seconds after the whistle last night, sadly, he's never getting fired, about Berhalter. I don't think that they were going to make a snap decision like that. I will say that any other country that cares about their national program would have gotten rid of Gregg Berhalter before yesterday, but certainly would have gotten rid of him after last night. Realistically, by this time next week, we should be talking about who's going to replace him. I just have this bad feeling that they're going to keep this man in place, and they're going to say, well, some of the players, Matt Turner said after the game that, it's not a tactical thing. I think Gio Reyna even kind of came out with I don't think Gio Reyna was being honest, but Gio Reyna had a comment out there about like, it's not tactics, it's the fact that the players didn't execute. I think that's because Gio Reyna doesn't want the heat that he was getting around the time that his family apparently leaked the story about Berhalter. So I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure that that's what that was. But I think U.S. Soccer is going to somehow figure out a way to sell themselves on the idea that Berhalter just needs to have the tools at his disposal. If Gregg Berhalter is the manager going into the 26 World Cup, I might not even watch it. I'm about as big of a soccer fan as you'll find. Played soccer my entire life, coached, kids play and travel. I love soccer. I'm not supporting the U.S. men's national team at the World Cup if Gregg Berhalter is the manager. I will tell you, I will never root against the U.S. I did not root against the U.S. last night, but I went into last night's game saying, if they lose and they flame out, it gives us a chance that Berhalter's gone. And I weighed the pros and cons of Berhalter being out with the U.S. continuing on and maybe even winning the Copa America, and I said I'd rather have Berhalter out, to give you an idea of where I'm at. There was a thing that Allison said before, and then I said something about, the comments. So here's where I'm at with this show, because we're at the end now. We are. We are officially at the end. The show went a lot longer than I expected it to. It's the first show. I talk. I'm sorry. The show, as it currently stands, the idea is for it to be this at least once a week is me and you in the comments. And if you're listening after the fact in the podcast feed on Apple Podcasts, Pandora, Spotify, Amazon Music, wherever you get your podcasts, I appreciate you just as much, if not more, for choosing to listen to this and me pulling up comments and referring to video and stuff that you can't even see. I appreciate you just as much. Part of my thought here is that at some point we might have calls. I have a phone number that's set up that I could pull up on the screen at some point. And if you want to leave a message on the line, we can pull it up. We can react to that. The commenters can react to the phone call. I can react to the phone call. I don't want to take live callers right now because there are a lot of legality things that I need to try to figure out before we go there. But I do think that that could be fun. I have the phone line. You can leave a message there. We'll react to your comments. That's the whole thing. But the other part of it is perhaps down the line we'll do something where there's going to be kind of like a video call in. I would actually feel a little bit better about that. It'd have to be people that I've seen, interacting in the comments a bit, that I feel like I could at least sort of trust to not come on and like moon the camera. I'm going to have to go back to like the PTSD of being a teacher when like we had to do the synchronous learning stuff and you'd tell all the kids like turn off the cameras because like inevitably somebody did something really stupid on a camera. I had to go into a few meetings towards the end of my tenure because there were students who were like doing things that they shouldn't have been doing or showing or holding on video. And then it became a whole thing because the lessons were recorded and posted to the cloud and the whole thing. And it's like, well, why couldn't the teacher prevent it? And it's like, well, because the kid can turn on the camera. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Eventually, I think we'll get to that. Joe Papel says concerned fan segment, which I like. That's kind of a play on something that we had over on Snow the Goalie during the Press Row show, having somebody come on. I actually like that idea, Joe, the concerned fan segment. Maybe we'll do that. And there was a really good point in the comments. There was another one. I think it was Brandon who might have come up with it. Yeah. Brandon Ficara has this as an idea. Segment idea. Killjoy. You tell some, I'm supposed to tell all of you something I'm excited about, and the comments try to kill the joy. Maybe we could do something like that. I started the show talking about, hey, there are a lot of positives about Paul George. Nobody went and became a killjoy in the comments, but if you wanted to, you could have. Nobody really became a killjoy about the Flyers draft, which I think was, a little bit spotty, a little bit iffy. We'll talk more about that on Snow the Goalie this week. Anyway, I want to thank everybody who joined me here for this first episode. I will bare my soul to you for a second. I wanted to do this for a very, very long time. And I said at the beginning, there's just that anxiety of like, are people going to watch? Are people going to care? Are they going to listen? Are they going to do whatever? I have no idea what the show's going to be. I have no idea how successful this show is going to be. I can see the number of total viewers across all platforms on X, on YouTube, on Facebook, all of that. And it's a really nice number. I'm very happy with it. And I'll see what the podcast feed looks like after the fact. Tuesdays and Fridays, 8 a.m., this show, wherever you get your podcasts, The Russ Joy Show. Also over on YouTube at The Russ Joy Show. That starts Friday. Today you had to go to the Joy Media account, but Friday will be at The Russ Joy Show. I would love if you would take the time out of your day to do two things. One, if you're watching on YouTube, hit the like button because that's massive. If you want to take it a step further, you could share the YouTube video, or you could wait till Friday and do that when the actual channel is like up and running and live and all that. But like the video, subscribe to the Joy Media account, subscribe over on the Russ Joy Show YouTube account, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Eventually, when there are enough episodes and you're able to leave a 5-star rating, I would love that. If you could leave a 5-star review, that would also be really helpful. When you start a new show, those are some of the things that are really important to help it, go up the charts. So I hope that you enjoyed the first show. Like I said, it's a little bit of a learning process. This went a lot longer than I expected it to. I thought this was going to be like a 35, 40-minute show. And a lot of you have hung in here. The comments are still going. We're an hour 20 into the show. It's been a lot of fun. I didn't take advantage of using the Crossing Broad channels, which I could have. I didn't do that. Could have used that massive following to try to pull in a bunch of people. I didn't do that. Maybe we'll do Friday, but not today. I decided we're going to go out on my own here. We're going to give it a shot. But I want to thank everybody who tuned in live. I will talk to all of you again on Friday morning. There's a chance that I'll be on Crossing Broadcast on Thursday with Kincaid. But if not, I will definitely talk to all of you on Friday morning here on the Russ Joy Show. A big thank you once again to everybody who tuned in for this first ever episode. And I will talk to all of you on Friday here on the Russ Joy Show. Talk to all of you soon. Bye-bye. I don't even know if the stream didn't end. I was just waving. All right, here we go. Now it's gone. There.